You have never gone hungry by accident. You have never slept outside because there was nowhere else to go. You have never been hunted. Most of you reading this have lived a life almost completely free of the dangers your ancestors faced every single day. And yet something feels wrong. Something feels missing. You scroll through hundreds of contacts and can't think of one person to call. You live in a city of millions and still eat dinner alone most nights. This isn't a coincidence. A scientist predicted this exact feeling more than 50 years ago, and he predicted it using mice. In 1968, a researcher named John Calhoun built something he called Universe 25. It was a box, about 4.5 feet wide, divided into hundreds of little apartments connected by mesh tunnels. Inside, he placed 8 mice. Then he gave them everything. Unlimited food, unlimited water, perfect temperature. No predators, no disease, nothing to fear ever again. Calhoun called it mouse paradise. He wanted to know what happens when a species is given absolutely everything it needs to survive and nothing left to struggle for. At first, paradise worked exactly as you'd expect. The mice ate. They explored. They mated. Within a few months, the population was doubling every 2 months. By day 315, there were over 600 mice living inside Universe 25. It looked like a triumph, a perfect society, free of suffering. But Calhoun was watching something else happen beneath the surface. Something the mice themselves probably didn't notice until it was too late. Space wasn't actually the problem. There was still room. What ran out first was something harder to measure. Role, purpose, a reason to do anything other than exist. In the wild, a mouse spends its day foraging, defending territory, building a nest, caring for its young, avoiding death. Every one of those tasks gives an animal a job, a place in the world. Calhoun had removed every single one of those jobs. The mice had nothing left to do except be near each other. And that turned out to be a kind of poison. He called what happened next the behavioral sink. Even though there was unclaimed space throughout the enclosure, the mice began crowding into the same few areas, piling on top of each other near food and water they didn't need to fight over. Have you ever noticed how everyone crams onto the same crowded subway platform while 3 feet away there's an empty bench? That's not logic. That's the same pull Calhoun saw in his mind. Proximity became the only behavior left, and constant, meaningless proximity, it turns out, breaks something in a social animal's brain. The dominant males were the first to unravel. With no territory worth defending and no real threats to repel, their aggression had nowhere to go, so it went everywhere. They attacked other males without reason. They attacked females. They attacked their own young. Calhoun documented bite wounds, mutilations, violence with no purpose behind it at all, because purpose was the one thing missing from their world. Psychologist Calhoun wasn't studying cruelty. He was studying what aggression looks like once it loses its function. Think about how strange that actually is. Aggression, in nature, almost always serves a purpose. It protects offspring. It secures territory. It establishes who eats first during a famine. Strip away the famine, the predators, and the competition for land, and you'd expect aggression to disappear along with the reasons for it. Instead, the opposite happened. The aggression didn't vanish. It became unmoored, drifting without a target until it attacked whatever was nearby. That single detail unsettled biologists more than almost anything else in the study, because it suggested aggression isn't only a response to threat, sometimes it's simply energy that has to go somewhere. And a life with no real challenges in it doesn't make that energy disappear, it just makes it aimless. Meanwhile, an entirely different group of males responded the opposite way. They withdrew completely. Calhoun called them the beautiful one, because without fights, without stress, without predators, they were physically flawless. Smooth fur, no scars, no wound. They spent their time eating, sleeping, and grooming themselves, and almost nothing else. They didn't fight. They didn't court females. They didn't seem to want anything at all. Sociologists studying the experiment later noted how unsettling it was that the healthiest looking mice were also the most behaviorally dead. Have you ever met someone who seemed to have it all together on the outside and felt completely hollow up close? Calhoun's beautiful ones were the original version of that. What makes the beautiful ones so disturbing in hindsight is that they weren't damaged in any visible way. A casual observer glancing into the enclosure would have picked them as the success stories. No injuries, no conflict, no visible stress at all. It was only by watching what they did with their time, day after day, that the absence became obvious. They simply stopped participating in the things that define a mouse's life. No nest building, no mating, no defending, no raising young. They had everything required to thrive, and they used none of it. They had become, in a very real sense, present but absent. Bodies still moving through a life that had quietly emptied out behind their eyes. The female mice fell apart too, but differently. With males either too violent or too withdrawn to form normal pair bonds, many females stopped engaging in courtship altogether. Maternal behavior, one of the most hardwired instincts in mammals, started breaking down. Mothers abandoned nests mid-litter. Some attacked their own pups. Reproduction didn't stop because the mice ran out of resources. It stopped because the social structure required to raise the next generation had collapsed first. This is the part that should make you sit up straighter. Population didn't crash because of starvation or disease or predation. None of those things beginnings existed in Universe 25. The population crashed because the social fabric collapsed before the physical resources ever ran short. By day 600, births had stopped almost entirely. The young that were born rarely survived because there were no adult mice left who remembered how to raise them. Researcher Edmund Ramsden, who later studied Calhoun's notes in depth, pointed out something chilling. The experiment didn't end in death from the outside. It ended in a society that had simply forgotten how to function. By 1973, less than 5 years after 8 mice walked into paradise, the population had fallen from a peak of 2,200 all the way to zero. Mouse utopia went extinct, sitting inside an enclosure that still had food, water, and space to spare. Calhoun didn't title his final report on a hopeful note. He called it Death Squared, a population dying despite having everything. Now here's the question you've probably already started asking yourself. Are you living in your own version of Universe 25? Think about it honestly. Most of you have never had to hunt, defend territory, or build physical shelter with your own hand. The struggles that gave your ancestors purpose, structure, and connection to other people have been engineered almost completely out of your daily life. You don't need your neighbor to help you survive winter anymore. You don't need a tribe to hunt with. Every practical reason humans once had to depend on each other has slowly been removed, one convenience at a time. And in its place, crowding without connection. You can be surrounded by people on a train, in an office, in a comment section, and feel as alone as if you were the only person on Earth. Researchers like Julianne Holt-Lundstad have shown that the modern epidemic of loneliness now carries a health risk comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Not because people are physically isolated. Often the opposite. They're packed into cities tighter than any point in human history. The danger was never distant. It was always disconnection disguised as proximity. Exactly the pattern Calhoun's mice fell into. Consider how many of your daily interactions are actually transactions instead of relationships. You order coffee from someone who doesn't know your name. You ride an elevator beside neighbors you've never spoken to. You like a friend's photo instead of calling them. Each of these moments feels like contact, but very little is actually being exchanged. It's the human equivalent of mice piling near the same feeder, close enough to touch, with nothing real passing between them. Proximity was never the same thing as connection, and Calhoun's enclosure proved that decades before anyone coined the term social media. What about the beautiful one, the withdrawn mice who looked perfect but did nothing? Look at how many people today have every comfort imaginable and still describe themselves as numb. Endless entertainment, food delivered to the door, climate control, social media that simulates connection without ever requiring it. None of these things are bad on their own, but stacked together, they start to resemble Calhoun's enclosure a little too closely. Comfort without struggle, contact without relationship, stillness mistaken for peace. This doesn't mean comfort is the enemy. Calhoun's mice didn't suffer because they had food and shelter. They suffered because nothing was ever asked of them again. No roles to fill, no struggle worth showing up for, no one who needed them specifically. Anthropologists studying small-scale societies have repeatedly found the same pattern in humans. People report the highest levels of meaning, not when life is easiest, but when they are needed by someone else, when their effort actually matters to another person's survival or well-being. So if you've been feeling that quiet hollowness lately, even though on paper your life is easier than almost any human who has ever lived, you're not broke. You're responding exactly the way a highly social animal responds when its environment removes every reason to depend on anyone else. Calhoun's mice didn't choose isolation. It was built into the walls around them, one convenience at a time, until connection simply had nowhere left to happen. The real warning in Universe 25 was never about overpopulation. It was about what gets lost when survival stops requiring each other. Calhoun gave his mice paradise, and paradise removed the one thing that had ever held them together, needing one another to make it through the day. You're not living inside a metal box with mesh tunnels, but look closely at your week. How much of it actually requires another? How many of your interactions could be deleted tomorrow and change nothing about your survival? That number, for most people today, keeps shrinking, and the smaller it gets, the more your life starts to rhyme with Universe 25. Paradise was never the problem the mice were warned about. The problem was what paradise quietly took away. And tonight, when you finally put your phone down in a perfectly comfortable room, in a perfectly safe building, in a city full of millions of people you'll never speak to, you might feel exactly what those mice felt right before everything started to fall apart.